Hello friends, this is Mrs. Dennis, and today I'm going to introduce the read aloud to you. This is The Wind in the Willows, Chapter 8, Mr. Toad. As always, when we introduce our read alouds, we start with vocabulary. So our first word is conceited. Conceited means having a very high opinion of yourself or thinking that you are the best. So if we can see a picture of our friend here, Garfield the cat, looking into a mirror, of course he thinks he is the best looking cat ever. And if you feel that way, then you can be considered conceited. Gross. Our definition of gross is going to be major or extreme. So if you can see that this person on the bike is doing some extreme stunts, so that means he's doing some gross stunts. It means major or extreme. Hour means time or a special or important moment. If you take a look at our clock, we are simply going to just look at the clock and the meaning of time for our definition. And when we read through our story, you will see that for us in our story, hour is used in the definition of time. Impertinence. It means disrespectful or rude back talk. And first of all, I know that none of my friends in this classroom are disrespectful or have rude back talk, but in the story you will see the word impertinence being used in that way. Improvised. It means solve the problem by making do with what you have, or it means invented. Now, let me tell you, improvised is going to be in our story, and it's going to be the definition of solve a problem by making do with what you had. I want you to think about who's going to improvise in this story. Somebody in this chapter is going to improvise, and I want you to find out who when you read. Sensible. Using, having, or showing good judgment. I know you've heard the term, use your common sense. Yep, that's what this is. Just use your good old-fashioned common sense, doing the right thing. So our word work for today is conceited. So if you have a very high opinion of yourself, and when you have conceited thoughts, you are thinking about how great you are. So our sentence is, Tony is very conceited. He thinks his drawing is far better than anyone else's. So if you think that you are better than someone, if something is better, you look better, you dress better, you draw better, you have a very, very, very high opinion of yourself, it can be considered as conceited. And at the top in our corner where it says word work, it says, I am not arrogant, I'm just a lot better than you. But really, that person is conceited. So I want to review our literary tools. So do you remember when we talked about dialogue and narration and perspective? And I want you to remember that perspective is how someone sees or experiences something, and a perspective can also shift from one character to another as a way of telling more about the story. So basically what that means is we've been reading this story, most of it through Mo's perspective, but there are some very small pieces of the story that are told from Rat's perspective, which is how Rat sees the story. We've been listening to it from how Mole sees it, but there are some small parts where we see it from Rat's perspective. And I want us to think about narration, right? Narration is who tells the story and how the story is told. Narration helps the reader know what the characters are doing. And narration also includes a lot of description to help the reader imagine what's happening in the story or the plot, and help the readers imagine the setting. So I want you to think about that part, when it comes to narration. That's what I want you to think about. Narration gives you a mental picture of what is happening in the story, right? That's what it helps to do. So I want you to listen to the following and see if you can identify these elements in the narration. Okay, here we go. I'm going to pull this down a little bit so you can see the whole thing. All right. Not long after their adventures in the wild wood, the rat and the mole found themselves plodding silently along a country lane. The rapid nightfall of mid-December had already descended upon them. The mole was thinking of supper as he followed obediently behind the rat, leaving the guidance in the darkness entirely behind him. Now, I just read that paragraph. Were you able to put a picture in your mind of the rapid nightfall of mid-December? The mole following obediently behind rat, and as they were leaving, the darkness was entirely behind them. Were you able to see that in your brain? That is what narration does, right? Narration helps you see those things in your brain. Let's read another example. As for the rat, he was walking a little way ahead, as was his habit. He walked steadily with his shoulders humped, his eyes fixed on the straight gray road in front of him. This is why he did not notice poor Mole when suddenly something soft and subtle, carried gently upon the cool night air, caused Mole to stop dead in his tracks. So I want you to think about that. Were you able to visualize anything when you read that, when you listened to it? Right? Were you able to see that rat was walking steadily with his shoulders humped, his eyes fixed on the straight gray road in front of him? That is what narration does. Narration helps us to visualize the story. So the voice the author uses to tell the narration part of the story, he's called the narrator. The narrators have their own personality that shows through in their storytelling. And it may or may not be the same personality as the author. So let's think about it like this. When I'm reading the story to you, I am the narrator, Mrs. Dennis. When I'm reading the story to you, I'm the narrator. But I don't have the same personality as the author, the person who wrote the story. I'm just reading it to you in my way with my own personality, right? So as a narrator, or the person telling the story, that's me. I can tell it to you the way I perceive it, right? The way that I want to tell it to you with my own personality. So I want you to keep that in mind. And don't worry, friends, we're going to go over narrator and narration again. It won't be the end. So the title of your read aloud for today is called Mr. Toad. Okay. And I want you to think about Mr. Toad from the other chapters that we read before this one. I want you to think about why Mr. Toad's friends are concerned about him. And I want you to think about the voice the author uses to tell the narration part of the story, right? So I want you to think about the narrator. And I want you to listen carefully as the narrator tells you more about Mr. Toad. And I want you to think about the themes of the story. Remember that word we talked about? Themes. Remember I said we're going to talk about themes all the time. Theme, theme, theme. Remember that. Right? The theme is what the author wants you to learn from this story. So, think about the theme, and I want you to listen carefully as the narrator tells you more about Mr. Toad. In this case, friends, the narrator is going to be me. Right? Mrs. Dennis is the narrator. I'm telling you the story. All right, friends? Remember the things I want you to think about. That's all for now.